The morning sun hammered down on Dustwood, baking the dirt street until cracks opened like old leather. Hot wind whipped through the narrow gaps between weathered storefronts, flinging sand that stung skin and left grit on every tongue. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Far off, the purple mountains loomed like ancient sentries, their peaks blurred in a haze of heat and dust. Belle Rowan stood in the doorway of Amos Pike's general store, her black dress frayed at the hem from countless washings. A lace veil hid her face, quivering in the dry breeze. She held one gloved hand against it, keeping the fabric tight. She could see the world clearly enough, but the world could not see her. And that suited her just fine. Ma'am, Amos Pike said, his voice rough, but not unkind, as he passed her a small parcel of flour and salt. Like everyone else in Dustwood, his eyes lingered on the veil, searching for a face he'd never seen. 2 bits. Belle set the coins on the counter without a word. Her movements were precise and measured. Silence, she'd learned, invited fewer questions than conversation. As she stepped outside, the whispers started again, soft as rattlesnake tails, but just as sharp. Her husband died strange, they say. Maybe she had a hand in it. The dusty street stretched before her like a gauntlet. Each step toward her small house at the edge of town meant passing more eyes, more judgment. The Dustwood saloon lay directly in her path, its batwing doors never still, as men came and went chasing whiskey and a brief escape from frontier life. She was halfway past when she heard hoofbeats, steady, deliberate, the sound of a horse that had traveled far. Belle shifted closer to the building's shadow instinct born of months spent trying to disappear. Out of the shimmering heat rode a lone traveler. His trail coat was gray with dust hat pulled low against the punishing sun. As he neared, Belle glimpsed what the hat's shadow couldn't quite hide, a long scar running from his left temple to his jaw, pale against sun-browned skin. His eyes scanned the street with the cool wariness of a man trained to spot trouble before it struck. Clay Maddox had ridden through plenty of dying towns, but Dustwood carried a special edge. Maybe it was the peeling paint on every building, or the way folks stared at him with equal parts hope and suspicion. Out here, strangers meant either danger or money, and often both. His mare Sage tossed her head and snorted, catching the scent of tension. Clay patted her neck. "Easy girl," he murmured, though he wasn't convinced himself. He'd meant to water the horse and ride on, but something in the air raised the same chill he felt before ambushes and gunfights. Dismounting, he caught sight of a black-clad woman standing perfectly still in the shadows. What held him wasn't her stillness, but the lace veil moving in the wind like something alive. Their eyes met through the thin screen, just a flicker, and something shifted inside him, a quiet recognition of one wounded soul spotting another. She turned away first, walking on with quick, deliberate steps. Clay watched her go, noting the proud set of her shoulders, the careful way she kept the world at arm's length. He'd seen that walk on soldiers after bloody battles, on survivors of raids, on anyone who knew the world had teeth and liked to bite. You'd best steer clear of that one stranger. Clay turned. A heavy-set man in a barkeep's apron stood framed in the saloon doorway, his face flushed from heat and liquor. "That so?" Clay's voice stayed even. "Belle Rowan," the man said. "Folks call her the Black Widow. Husband got himself shot 8 months back. She claims raiders, but funny thing, nothing was stolen. Been hiding behind that veil ever since." Clay said nothing, just loosened Sage's cinch and led her to the trough. He'd learned long ago that frontier gossip was a stew of truth and lies impossible to sort clean. Inside the saloon was thick with smoke and the sour reek of spilled beer. Clay ordered a whiskey. The bartender, Judd Crow, he introduced himself, was eager to talk once Clay's coin hit the bar. "You've got the look of a gun hand," Judd said, topping off his glass without being asked. "Could use men like you. Raiders been prowling the North Trail. McCready gang mean bunch." Clay tossed back the drink, feeling the burn, and let his gaze drift toward the street where the veiled woman had disappeared. Belle Rowan. There was a story behind the way she moved, a pain he recognized from his own scars. "Storm brewin'," someone muttered from a corner. Clay looked out to see dust devils spinning and a yellow haze crawling over the horizon. Dust storm, Judd confirmed. This time of year they roll in hard. Might last days. Clay set down his empty glass and rose. The whiskey had barely warmed him, but his instincts said it was time to settle his horse and brace for trouble. Clay Maddox led Sage toward the livery stable, scanning the blistering street where the veiled woman had vanished. Dustwood, he told himself, was just another town waiting to dry up and blow away. Nothing here but trouble. Thunder grumbled somewhere beyond the clear sky, the sound of wind gathering muscle. Maybe it was more than weather. Maybe it was fate coming on like a freight train, deaf to any man's wishes. Years of surviving by instinct told Clay that change was rolling in with those yellow clouds. Whether it meant salvation or ruin, he couldn't yet name. Still, he surprised himself with the choice he made. He would stay a day or two, give Sage time to rest, and let the storm pass. And it had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the woman hidden behind lace, whose quiet sorrow tugged at something deep inside him. The wind stiffened, sending tumbleweeds skittering down the empty street like frightened spirits. Across town, in a small house on the edge of Dustwood Belle. Rowan stood at her window, watching the scarred stranger lead his mare to shelter. She felt his eyes on her even now, a weight that pressed through wood and glass. For 8 long months, she had lived unseen, a ghost inside her own life. Yet that man had looked straight through the veil and somehow found her. It should have chilled her. Instead, she wondered what history carved that scar and shadowed those gray eyes. Then the first wall of dust slammed into Dustwood, turning noon into near night. The storm had come along with a gunslinger who would upend everything. But Belle didn't know that yet. All she knew was that for the first time in months, she felt something other than grief and fear. She felt alive. When the dust storm finally moved, on a chalky film coated every roof and porch painting, the town the color of old bones. Belle swept her porch for the 3rd time that morning, letting the motion calm her mind. Through the thin lace, she watched Dustwood creak back to life, shop doors opening, women shaking out linens, only to find them dusty again, men spitting grit and muttering. "Mrs. Rowan." The voice froze her. Silas Boone. The banker who held half the town in debt, stood at the bottom of her steps, dressed sharp as always, not a speck of dust daring to touch him. "Your rent's due next week," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "I trust there won't be difficulties." Belle gave a brief nod, all the response he'd get. Boone lingered, eyes narrowing as though he could pierce the veil. "You know, a woman in your position might consider more practical arrangements. I could lower that rent under the right circumstances." The unspoken offer hung in the air like sour smoke. Belle's grip on the broom tightened, but she said nothing. After a long, heavy moment, Boone tipped his hat in a mock salute and sauntered off. Only when he disappeared did her shoulders sag. The small tin box under her bed barely covered this month's payment. Frank Deacon's death had left her nothing but debts and rumors. Amos Pike extended credit because Nora insisted, but charity in Dustwood always came with strings, usually tied to a person's pride. At the livery, Clay bent over Sage's hoof. She'd picked up a stone 2 days back. Not serious, but she needed time. Finn Doyle, the old hostler, leaned on a stall door, chewing tobacco. "She'll be sound in a few days," he said. But I'd fit her with new shoes all around if you plan on running her hard." "How much?" Clay asked. $4 for shoes, $2 for the week's board. Clay had the money, though staying meant changing plans. Still, to push Sage now would risk laming her. "Go ahead," he said. Finn nodded, then cast a knowing glance toward the stable door. "Saw you watching Belle Rowan yesterday." Clay stayed quiet, stroking Sage's flank. Not judging, Finn went on. "Just reckon you ought to know the story. Her husband, Frank Deacon, drunk deep in debt. Night he died, she was the only one there. 2 bullets in his chest. Says masked men broke in. Folks ain't sure." "You don't believe her?" Clay asked. "I knew Frank. Quick fists, quicker temper. More than once I saw Belle at the well, early moving, careful if you catch my drift. Clay did. He'd known women who wore those same quiet scars. So folks figure she might have killed him," Finn said. "Some think she had every right. Either way, that veils more than mourning, if you follow me." Later, Clay wandered into Amos Pike's store for supplies he didn't need. Through the window, he could see Belle's house, a small, lonely speck at the far edge of town, an island in a sea of dry suspicion. "Looking for something special?" Amos asked, catching the direction of his gaze. "Just browsing," Clay said, picking up a tin of peaches he hadn't planned on buying. Clay Maddox rested a palm on the doorframe of Amos Pike's store and said evenly, "Heard you might be looking for someone to guard your freight wagons." Amos's eyes narrowed sharp as a hawk's. "Where'd you hear that saloon talk?" "Something about the Wade Flint gang, could be," Clay replied. "Might be, I do," Amos admitted at last. "Lost 2 shipments this past month." He nodded toward Clay's twin Colts. "You any good with those? Good enough? Pays $20 a week, ammo included. Mostly night duty, sometimes escort runs if we need 'em. Decent money, and it gave Clay a reason to linger while Sage healed. "When do I start tonight?" "Warehouses out back, sundown." Clay tipped his hat and stepped outside, nearly colliding with Belle Rowan coming up the steps. For a heartbeat, they froze close enough for him to see her eyes through the lace. Gray-green, like Sage's coat after rain. She stepped back quickly, but not before he caught a faint scent of lavender and something untamed beneath it. "Ma'am." He touched his brim. Belle inclined her head ever so slightly and slipped past him into the store. Clay forced himself down the boardwalk, but those eyes stayed with him. That evening, the sun bled red across the mountains as Clay made his way to the warehouse, rifle in hand. The building crouched behind the store like a fort, packed with the goods that kept frontier life, breathing bolts of cloth, barrels of grain, crates of tools and medicine. "You the new guard?" A young man stepped from the shadows, nervously fingering a shotgun. "Clay Maddox. Luke Pike. Pa told me to show you around." Luke couldn't have been more than 18 and was trying hard to grow a mustache that refused to cooperate. "Pa says you're handy with a gun." "Handy enough." Luke walked him through the warehouse, pointing out weak spots and explaining the watch schedule. "Mostly quiet," he said. "Sometimes a drunk figures we keep whiskey in here. But real worries organized raids." They settled in for the night. Luke kept up a steady stream of small talk, while Clay listened to the town's dark soundtrack coyotes yipping on the far hills, the tinny piano from Judd Crow's saloon, the wind sighing through warped boards. Near midnight, motion snagged Clay's eye. A slim figure in black glided behind the church toward the well. Belle Rowan. She drew water in darkness, choosing the hours when curious eyes were shut. "That's when she always comes," Luke whispered, following Clay's gaze. "Pa says to let her be. Says she's had enough trouble." "Your folks sound like decent people," Clay said quietly. "They are. Ma, too. They don't buy into the gossip. Ma says any woman who stayed with Frank Deacon that long must have the patience of a saint." A wolf's mournful cry rose in the distance. Another answered. Then another. Clay instinctively checked his rifle. "They're getting bolder," Luke muttered. "Drought's driven off all the deer. I found tracks near the chicken coops yesterday." Belle finished at the well and started back. When she neared the warehouse, she paused, sensing perhaps 2 watchers in the dark. After a long moment, she moved on, vanishing like a wisp of smoke. The rest of the night stayed quiet. At dawn, with the sky soft pink, Amos arrived to relieve them. "Any trouble?" "Quiet as a grave," Clay said. "Good." "Same time tonight," Clay nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He'd taken the job for practical reasons, but already Dustwood's hooks were in him. Part of it was Belle the mystery, and the hurt he recognized. But more than that, the town itself felt like a powder keg, resentment and greed waiting for a single spark. He headed back to the small boarding house he'd rented. Bone-tired but restless, he lay awake watching the mountains turn purple in the new light. Somewhere out there, Wade Flint's gang was plotting their next raid. Inside Dustwood, prejudice festered like a wound. And at the center of it all, a veiled woman carried secrets as dark as his own. Clay had ridden into Dustwood by chance, meaning only to pass through. But the West had a way of rewriting a man's plans, of putting him exactly where fate demanded. As sleep finally claimed him, he dreamed of gray-green eyes and wolves calling across the Black Hills. Miles away, in a canyon unmarked on any map, Wade Flint cleaned his revolver and studied a crude sketch of Dustwood. His men shifted, restlessly hungry for action. Soon, he promised. "We'll hit the town like a thunderclap. Take what we want, leave nothing but ashes." He'd heard about the new guard Amos Pike had hired a drifter with a quick draw. Flint only grinned. He'd put more than one fast gun under the dirt. Dustwood would fall like every other town, and anyone standing in his path would feed the buzzards. The storm Clay had sensed was indeed on its way. But it would bring more than dust and wind. It would bring blood and fire, forcing every soul in Dustwood to choose a side. Before long, there would be no room for veils, secrets, or the comfort of staying apart. Change had come to Dustwood, and it wore the face of violence. It began on a Saturday, when Judd Crow's saloon overflowed with whiskey and restless tempers. Belle Rowan had timed her trip for the busiest hour, hoping to slip through unseen. But in Dustwood, no hour was busy enough to hide her. "Well, look what we've got." The widow Rowan, a thick-necked ranch hand, drawled, as he and 2 companions blocked the steps of Amos Pike's store. The speaker, Rex Porter, swayed on his boots, whiskey heavy on his breath. His partners, the Nash brothers, grinned with the cruel delight of men itching for sport. Belle tried to skirt them, but Rex shifted with her close enough that the stench of liquor burned her nose. "Where you rushing, darlin'? We're just being friendly. Real friendly." Cole Nash reached toward her veil. "Why don't you show us what you're hiding under there?" Belle jerked back her basket, tipping and spilling flour and dried beans across the dusty boards. She dropped to her knees, fingers trembling, but Rex planted his boot on the flour sack, bursting it open. "Clumsy," he sneered. "Maybe you need a man's help at that house of yours. I volunteer." The Nash brothers snorted with laughter and closed in. Belle rose slowly, hemmed in by their broad shoulders. Fear tightened her throat, but a deeper fire flared hot. 8 months of whispered slander and barely veiled contempt boiled over. "Leave me be." Her voice cut through their laughter like a whip crack. Rex's face hardened. "You given me orders, woman? Maybe you forgot your place since you shot your husband." "I didn't." Belle caught herself. Denial only fed their hunger. "Sure you didn't." He stepped closer. Maybe we ought to see for ourselves. Make sure you're not hiding a gun under all that black. Belle knew with sudden icy clarity that running would only excite them more. They were like feral dogs. Chase was the game they lived for. A gunshot cracked the air. Rex froze his hand inches from her veil. Slowly he turned to see Clay Maddox standing in the street, revolver raised skyward, smoke still curling from the muzzle. The gunfighter's face might have been carved from granite. Problem here. Clay's voice carried a deadly calm. No problem, Rex muttered, bravado draining fast. Just talking to the widow. Conversation's over. Jed Nash, braver or drunker than his kin, puffed out his chest. This ain't your concern, Drifter. Move along. Clay didn't shift his hand, but his stance sharpened like a drawn blade. It's my concern now. You've got two choices, walk away on your own or be hauled off. Decide quick. I don't wait long. The three men hesitated, weighing numbers against the cold certainty in Clay's eyes. He was the kind who'd killed before and wouldn't lose sleep doing it again. Rex broke first. Come on, boys. Widow ain't worth the trouble anyhow. He spat in the dust near Belle's feet. This ain't over, Drifter. They swaggered off trying to salvage their pride, but the damage was done. Faces crowded windows and doorways, whispers already buzzing. Belle bent to rescue her scattered goods cheeks burning. Clay holstered his Colt and knelt to help gathering beans into his big palm. You hurt, no? Her voice came out thin and sharp. You shouldn't have interfered. Couldn't stand by and watch. You don't understand. You've only made it worse. Belle tried to scoop flour back into the torn sack hands, shaking harder. They'll do nothing, Clay said flatly. Men like that pick on the weak, show them steel, and they slink off. At last she met his gaze. Behind the veil, her gray-green eyes brimmed with unshed tears. And when you leave? What then? Clay had no answer that wouldn't be a lie. Drifters didn't settle. Staying meant ties he'd long sworn off. Let me walk you home, he said instead. That will only stir more gossip. Let them talk. For a moment, she wavered, pride and loneliness pulling in opposite directions, then gave a small nod. They walked in silence, Clay carrying what supplies he'd saved. Behind curtains, the town's eyes followed measuring, judging. By nightfall, everyone would know the gunslinger had stepped between the widow and danger. Belle's small adobe house stood apart, its struggling garden pale in the desert dust. At the gate, she accepted the basket. Thank you, she said quietly. But don't make me your cause. I've managed 8 months. I can manage more. Is that what you call it, just managing? It's enough, is it? The space between them pulsed with words neither dared speak. Then Belle turned and slipped inside, leaving Clay at the gate, like a man waking from a half-remembered dream. That evening, the saloon buzzed like a kicked beehive. Clay sat in a shadowed corner, sipping whiskey while talk swirled. Pulled iron on Rex Porter, someone said. Sweet on the widow. Gonna mean trouble, another replied. Behind the bar, Judd Crow polished glasses with brisk strokes. You stirred the pot, friend. Rex and those Nash boys don't forget a slight. Neither do I, Clay said, his smile carrying no warmth. When have I ever been accused of being smart? Clay Maddox muttered into his glass. The saloon door swung wide, letting in a breath of cool evening air and Marshal Hank Rourke. Dustwood's lawman, well past 60, moved like an old hinge, slow and deliberate, his silver badge gleaming heavy on his vest. He eased into the chair across from Clay, joints cracking like dry twigs. Mr. Maddox Hank said, his faded blue eyes weighing the younger man. Heard there was a bit of excitement today. Nothing worth the telling, Clay replied. Hank studied him a moment longer. I've been wearing this star 15 years. You know how I lasted that long? By not starting fights, I can't finish. Meaning Rex Porter's cousin is Judge Eli Burke, the biggest cattle boss in the valley. And the Nash brothers ride for him. You made yourself some powerful enemies this afternoon. I've had worse." "I don't doubt it," Hank said, rubbing a hand over his weathered jaw. "Men like you usually have. But this is my town, such as it is. I don't aim to see it torn apart because some drifter decided to play hero. Wasn't playing. No, I reckon you weren't." Hank pushed to his feet, slower than he liked. "Just remember, heroes out here have a way of dying young, and they usually take others with them when they go." When Hank left, Clay stayed put, staring into the amber depths of his whiskey. He'd followed instinct when he saw Belle Rowan cornered. But Hank was right, instincts had a cost. Seeds of trouble were already in the ground. Outside dusk bled into night, draping Dustwood in long, watchful shadows. In her lonely house at the edge of town, Belle sat by the window and watched darkness crawl over the desert. She'd taken off her veil, revealing a face etched by sorrow, yet still striking. Her fingers traced the lace as thoughts of gray eyes and a scarred face drifted through her mind of kindness freely given when she least expected it. For 8 months, she had hidden inside grief and guilt, letting Dustwood's cruel gossip define her. Yet today, for one fragile moment, someone had looked at her as if she were worth protecting. It was dangerous, that flicker of hope. Hope was a luxury she had sworn off. Beyond town, on a stony ridge, Rex Porter sat astride his horse, simmering with whiskey and wounded pride. Beside him, Cole and Jed Nash waited for orders. "We're gonna teach that drifter a lesson," Rex growled. "And the widow too, but not yet. Let him think it's over, let him get comfortable. Then we'll show him what happens when outsiders meddle in Dustwood business." The wind freshened, carrying the faint scent of mountain rain. A storm was building in the sky and in men's hearts. Belle was right, Clay had made things worse. Yet sometimes worse had to come before better could begin. That night, Clay stood watch at Amos Pike's warehouse rifle, steady, senses sharp. Luke Pike was jumpy, flinching at every creak. "You think they'll come?" the boy asked. "Not tonight," Clay said, checking his Colts with practiced ease. "Men like Rex need time to build courage. But they'll come. You're not worried worry's a luxury, kid. When trouble shows, you meet it. Till then, you wait and watch." Far off, a wolf's long, lonely howl split the night echoed by others until the air pulsed with their wild chorus. Clay thought of Belle, alone in her house, hemmed in by grief, and of Rex Porter's pig-eyed malice. The wolves sang of hunt and blood, of borders challenged and defended. Clay knew their song. He'd been living it for years, roaming from fight to fight. But standing in Dustwood's dark, he wondered if he was ready to stop being a lone wolf. Maybe it was time to find a pack. Just past midnight, the storm hit, turning the world into a blind fury of wind and grit. Clay fought through the chaos, one hand clamped to his hat, the other shielding his eyes. He'd meant to head straight to the boarding house, but the storm had its own map. Through the roaring black, he spotted a lamp flicker, a lone light in Belle Rowan's window. Before he knew it, he was at her gate. The front door banged open, ready to tear loose. He vaulted the fence and caught it before it could rip from its hinges. "Anyone here?" he shouted. Belle stepped from the dim interior, wrestling a broken shutter. The gale had ripped the veil from her face, and for the first time, Clay saw her clearly. Delicate, yet unyielding, with a faint scar on her left cheekbone, an old hurt long healed. Their eyes locked, a heartbeat, before she turned away, a hand flying up to hide what the wind had revealed. "Don't," Clay called over the roar. "We've got to secure the house." She hesitated, then let necessity outweigh pride. Together they worked in silence, boarding windows, stuffing rags under doors, hauling in anything the wind might snatch. They moved as if they'd done this together a dozen times, wordless, but in perfect accord. When at last the worst of it was shut out, they sank into chairs in the front room, lungs heaving. The lamp threw restless shadows across the walls, while the house groaned under the storm's assault. "Thank you," Belle said finally, her voice oft but firm. "Not just for the storm, for earlier when you faced Rex and the others." She lowered her gaze. "No one stood up for me in a very long time." Clay studied her in the wavering light, his scar catching the glow like a brand. Without the veil, Belle Rowan looked younger, yet there was a quiet strength in her face that spoke of battles already fought. The faint scar along her cheekbone told its own hard truth, and the way she carried herself poised to flee or to fight said the rest. "Your husband did that?" Clay Maddox asked, gently, nodding toward the scar. Her hand rose without thinking, fingertips brushing the mark. "The first time he hit me, he called it an accident." I believed him. Her laugh was dry as desert wind. "I believed a lot of things back then. Must have been hell living like that. You learn to survive. Stay small, quiet, read the weather before it breaks." She tilted her head toward the storm battering the house. "Sometimes it's easier to predict than a man's temper." The wind rattled the walls like distant gunfire. After a long silence, Belle spoke again, voice barely above the roar. "The night Frank Deacon died. The whispers aren't all wrong. I was alone with him. He'd been drinking hard, lost big at cards. Came home blaming me, said I was cursed that I'd ruined him. He waved his pistol, shouting we'd both be better off dead." She hugged her shawl tighter. I begged him, went to my knees like he wanted. But it was never enough. He aimed at me, and I knew this time he meant it. Her voice fell to a tremor. So I grabbed for the gun. We struggled. It fired once. But the second shot, he was already falling. I wanted to be sure he'd never rise again. The confession hung heavy between them. Outside, something crashed. Maybe a branch, maybe a strip of roofing, but Clay didn't flinch. "You think I'm a murderer now?" she asked. "I think you're alive," he said simply. "That's what matters." The marshal didn't see it that way. Marshal Hank Rourke said there was no proof of my story, no witness. Frank bought drinks for everyone when he won. They never saw what he was behind closed doors. Belle turned sharply to the window, staring into the swirling dark. "So I became the Black Widow, the woman who killed her husband and hides her face. Why stay? Why not start fresh somewhere else? With what Frank gambled everything away. This house is mortgaged. Debts are stacked high." Her palm pressed the glass. "And maybe I thought I deserved their judgment. Maybe the veil isn't only to keep them out." Clay stepped beside her. "You defended yourself against a man who would have killed you. That's not murder. That's survival. Is there a difference?" He thought of the men he'd put in the ground, some in self-defense, others for pay, some because they'd needed killing. In memory, the lines blurred until only the weight remained. Sometimes he said honestly, sometimes there is. Belle turned suddenly close, so near he caught the gold flecks in her storm-gray eyes. "What about you, Clay Maddox? What ghosts follow you?" The question cut deep but fair. She'd bared her soul. He owed her a piece of his own. Family farm in Missouri. He began the words rusty with years of silence. Had a wife, Ada Cross, and a little girl, Rose Cross. She was 6 horse crazy. His jaw tightened. "I came home from town to find the place burning. Border raiders said it was revenge for something I never did. I found Ada in the yard. Rose, too." Belle's hand brushed his arm, gentle as a moth's wing. I'm sorry. I hunted them. Took 2 years, but I found every last one. After that, I just kept moving, easier than standing still and remembering. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve. Been running so long I almost forgot how to stop. The lamp flickered as wind probed for weakness. They stood in its trembling light, 2 battered souls meeting across the distance of pain. Belle's hand stayed on his arm, neither of them eager to break the contact. We make quite a pair, she said softly. The widow and the gunslinger. The town will feast on this. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You can ride out any time. Maybe I'm tired of leaving. The admission surprised him as much as it did her. Standing with this brave, wounded woman while the storm raged felt like the first real stillness he'd known in years. Belle searched his face. Breath-catching. Don't make promises you can't keep. I've had enough of those to last a lifetime. I don't make many promises, he said, but the ones I make, I keep. She wanted to believe he could see it in her eyes, but trust once broken is slow to mend. Stepping back, she drew a careful breath. You should go, she said. The worst of the storm has passed. If someone sees you leave at first light, I can stand the gossip, but I have to care about it. She moved to the door, ready to see him out. Thank you for everything. But this can't happen again. Clay Maddox knew better than to press a wounded spirit. He'd gentled spooked horses and seen enough hurt creatures to understand that trust had to be earned, not forced. Slowly he stepped to the door, then paused. That veil, he said quietly, you don't need it for protection or for penance. You survived Belle. There's no shame in that. She didn't answer, but he caught the glimmer of tears before she turned away. The storm had truly passed now, leaving the air sharp and clean with the scent of wet earth. Clay walked the empty streets, thinking of scars and secrets, and of the way her hand had rested on his arm. He'd told her more tonight than he'd shared with anyone in years. The question was what to do with the feeling rising inside him, the sudden urge to stop running. Inside her house, Belle doused the lamp and stood in darkness. She touched the spot on her cheek where the veil usually fell, remembering the gray eyes that had looked straight at her without judgment. For 8 months, she had convinced herself that isolation was safety, that the veil kept her from the world's cruelty. But tonight, with a scarred gunslinger sharing her pain, she'd felt something she thought long buried. Hope. It frightened her more than Rex Porter's threats, or the town's whispering tongues, because hope meant risking her heart again. Yet as she climbed the stairs to her empty bed, she found herself thinking not of Frank Deacon's rages or Dustwood's gossip, but of Clay's quiet strength and the grief he carried like her own. Outside, dawn broke, in rose and gold laying soft light across the storm-swept town. Dustwood bore fresh scars, shattered signs, new gullies carved by the wind, landmarks shifted or gone. Change had arrived whether anyone wanted it or not. And at the heart of that change stood a widow and a gunslinger bound by pain and by the fragile promise of something better. The first shots of the next storm came with the sunrise shattering windows along Main Street and sending the few early risers scrambling for cover. Clay was out of bed with guns drawn before his feet hit the floor. Through the window, he counted riders 15, maybe 20, firing into the air and whooping like devils. Wade Flint's gang had come to Dustwood. He dressed fast and checked his ammunition. Shouts, screams, and splintering glass rose from below. He'd seen this kind of raid before, hit hard and fast, banking on shock to paralyze a town. By the time he reached the street, chaos ruled. Outlaws galloped everywhere, some smashing doors, others dragging goods into waiting sacks. At the bank, Silas Boone crouched behind his desk, while masked riders stuffed bills into canvas bags. In the saloon, Judd Crow had barricaded himself inside, but Flint's men were already setting fire to the porch. Clay moved through the uproar like a shadow, every motion deliberate. His first shot knocked a raider from the saddle as he tried to torch Amos Pike's store. The second cut down a thief hauling stolen goods out the door. "It's that damn gunslinger," someone yelled, and suddenly Clay was the center of every gun barrel in sight. He dove behind a water trough as bullets chewed the boards to splinters. The thick oak held, but he was pinned. Across the street he spotted Luke Pike frozen in the store's doorway, rifle hanging useless. Luke, inside bar, the door. The boy startled, as if waking, then stumbled back and slammed the door. More gunfire cracked from the far end of town. Marshal Hank Rourke and a handful of citizens had overturned a wagon and were firing steadily from behind it. Clay broke from cover, sprinting for better ground. A bullet grazed his shirt as he rolled behind the blacksmith's anvil. From there, he had a clean line on several raiders. For every outlaw he dropped, 2 more seemed to surge forward. Acrid smoke from burning timbers mixed with the bitter tang of gunpowder. Dustwood was bleeding out. Then he saw Belle. She had left her house not to run, but to guide women and children to the church for safety. Her veil was gone, her face set with fierce resolve. A mounted raider spotted her and spurred his horse, certain she'd be easy prey. 60 yards a moving target, innocence behind her, an impossible shot. Clay made it anyway. The outlaw pitched from the saddle. Belle didn't falter, ushering children inside the church. Clay Maddox, a voice, boomed over the din. A massive rider in a black duster sat squarely in the center of Main Street, calm, as if bullets were no more than summer flies. Clay knew the face from wanted posters, Wade Flint himself. "Heard there's a fast gun in Dustwood," Flint shouted. "Come on out, let's see how fast." A trap obvious as a rattler's coil. Step into the open and Flint's men would cut him down. Refuse, and folks might think him a coward, dangerous for morale in a fight like this. Before Clay could choose, unexpected help cracked through the gun smoke. Belle Rowan stepped out of the church doorway with Frank Deacon's old rifle braced to her shoulder. Her first shot spun one of Flint's men off his feet. The second forced another to dive for cover. It was all the opening Clay needed. He surged up both Colts, barking fire. Flint's horse reared as lead hissed past, and the outlaw chief cursed, wrestling for control. Around them, the fight deepened, a savage roar of flame bullets and defiance as Dustwood fought for its life. Amos Pike and his boy Luke had found their grit firing from the store windows. Zeke Carver, old as the hills, but steady as bedrock, dropped raiders with a buffalo gun that thundered across Main Street. Even Silas Boone, furious at seeing his bank ransacked, snatched up a shotgun and joined the fight. "Pull back, Wade," Flint bellowed. "Burn it all!" His riders heaved torches and fire leapt greedily from wall to wall. Dry boards blazed like kindling, but the focused arson gave the defenders clean targets. Clay Maddox cut down 2 more outlaws, while Belle Rowan's rifle cracked steady from the church steps. Then Clay spotted Rex Porter among the raiders, the Nash brothers flanking him. So that's how Flint knew Dustwood's weak spots inside help. Rex's eyes met Clay's, his face twisting with hate. "There's the bastard! Kill him!" Rex roared. Gunfire converged on Clay's anvil hideout. Bullets rang off the iron like hammer blows. He couldn't stay pinned. Diving low, he sprinted for the cover of Amos Pike's store. A shot from Cole Nash found him first, burning through his side and spinning him hard to the dirt. Clay rolled right hand, still steady, revolver ready. His fingers came away red, but his aim never wavered. Rex Porter strode forward, sure of the kill. "Not so tough now, are you, Drifter?" Clay watched Rex's trigger finger. When the man paused to take careful aim, Clay fired. Rex's bullet flew wide as Clay's round struck dead center. Rex staggered, disbelief frozen on his face, and collapsed. The Nash brothers charged, pistols blazing. Clay dropped Cole Nash with one clean shot, but his Colt clicked empty as he swung toward Jed Nash. Time slowed, death itself seemed to drift closer in the muzzle flash of Jed's pistol. A rifle cracked from above, sharp and sure. Jed Nash spun and crumpled. Clay looked up to see Belle on the church roof, smoke curling from her barrel. Their eyes met across the burning street, and a silent understanding passed between them. Fall back. Wade Flint's shout split the chaos. Back to the hills. The raiders broke, firing wildly to cover their retreat. They had stolen some loot, but at a brutal price, bodies lay sprawled across Dustwood's main drag. When the last outlaw vanished into the dawn haze, an eerie stillness settled, broken only by the crackling of flames and the groans of the wounded. Clay pushed to his feet, one hand clamped over his bleeding side. From every doorway, survivors emerged, faces streaked with soot and disbelief. Half the town burned, but Dustwood still stood. Marshal Hank Rourke limped up, his left arm hanging useless. "You hit bad," Clay asked. "I'll live," Hank said. He glanced toward the church where Belle was climbing down from the roof. "Anyone killed Finn Doyle caught one in the chest, he's gone," Hank said grimly. "A few others wounded, but Doc Levi Grant figures they'll pull through." The marshal swept his eyes over the wreckage. "Would have been far worse without you." Around them, neighbors formed bucket lines, fighting the blazes with desperate speed. Clay stepped forward to help, but a wave of dizziness nearly dropped him. Strong hands steadied him. Belle's, her face streaked with smoke, and her eyes bright with worry. "You're bleeding." "Come on." Doc Grant sat up inside. He let her guide him, too tired to protest. Inside the church, benches had become hospital cots. Doc Grant worked with calm precision despite the chaos. He inspected Clay's wound with a practiced eye. Bullet went clean through. "You're lucky inch to the left. And we'd be measuring you for a pine box." He cleaned the wound and wrapped it tight. "Stay put. You've lost a lot of blood." Clay tried to rise. "Flint will regroup. He'll be back." Belle pressed a firm hand to his chest. "Let Marshal Rourke handle it. You've done enough." Hank stepped in his arm in a fresh sling. "She's right. Flint's lost too many men to hit us again today. He'll need time to lick his wounds. Gives us a chance to shore up defenses." Clay's eyes hardened. "Rex Porter rode with them. So did the Nash brothers." "I know," Hank said quietly, "but they won't trouble anyone else." As the marshal moved on to check the other wounded, Belle stayed close. Smoke seeped through the old rafters, but neither of them stirred. "Thank you," Clay said at last, voice low but sure. "That shot on Jed Nash. I owe you my life." Belle glanced at her hands, stained with his blood and gunpowder. "I've killed 2 men now," she said softly, the weight of it heavy in the hushed, smoky air. "Does it get easier?" Belle Rowan asked quietly. Clay Maddox thought of all the faces that haunted his sleep, the lives he'd taken that never left his conscience. "No," he said, his voice low and certain. "And that's a good thing. The day it feels easy is the day you lose a piece of your soul." Outside, the fight for Dustwood had shifted from gunfire to bucket lines, from killing to saving what still stood. The town was battered but unbroken. By morning, they would count their dead and start rebuilding. For now, in a church-turned field hospital, 2 battered hearts sat side by side, drawing strength from quiet understanding. The flames would burn out, the fallen would be buried, and life would stumble forward. But something in Dustwood had changed forever. The town had faced fire and survived forging bonds that wouldn't break easily. And at the center of it, a widow had thrown away her veil and shouldered a rifle. The Black Widow of Dustwood was gone. In her place stood Belle Rowan, a woman who had claimed her strength. The next strike came just before dawn, when the eastern sky was barely gray. Clay had expected it. 3 days of uneasy calm was too long for Wade Flint to stay beaten. Clay waited on the roof of Amos Pike's store rifle across his knees, eyes on the dark horizon. The first sign was a rolling smudge of dust. Then came the distant thunder of many hooves. He fired a warning shot into the air. Instantly, Dustwood snapped awake. Barricades they had built over the past 3 days were manned rifles, cocked ammunition handed out. Flint's crew didn't rush in this time. They spread wide, surrounding the town and cutting off escape. They dismounted under cover and advanced in careful lines. Here they come. Marshal Hank Rourke's shout rose from the jail, where he directed the West Side defense. Gunfire cracked from every quarter as Dustwood's fighters opened up. Clay worked the rifle smoothly, each shot deliberate. His ribs still ached from the earlier wound, but adrenaline dulled the pain. Below him, Belle coordinated the ammunition runners, mostly women, and older children, her hair tied back, dressed in canvas trousers and a man's work shirt. The transformation was complete. The hidden widow had become a field captain. Clay Eastside's breaking Luke Pike's panicked call turned Clay toward the blacksmith's shop. A gang of outlaws had forced their way in. He slung the rifle and sprinted across rooftops, leaping the narrow gaps between buildings. Dropping into the street behind the raiders, he opened fire. 3 men fell before they knew he was there. The rest wheeled, shooting wild. Clay kept moving, slipping between door frames and rain barrels, his own fire deadly precise. A bullet grazed his shoulder, another tore through his hat, but he pressed on. Within moments the breach was sealed, the street littered with the dead. Push them back. Belle charged in with fresh fighters' rifle cracking. Don't let them regroup. Together, they drove the invaders out, Belle firing with calm fury. When her rifle emptied, she drew a pistol and kept firing. Clay had ridden with seasoned gun hands, less composed under fire. On the west side, the defense wavered. Outlaws pressed hard, sensing a break. Just as the line began to buckle, unexpected reinforcements arrived. Silas Boone, the banker, everyone had called a coward, strode in with a squad from May Hollis's Chinese camp, wielding everything from modern Winchesters to battered old shotguns. They struck the raiders' flank with ferocity, halting the advance. Never thought I'd see the day, Amos Pike muttered as he reloaded, watching Boone fight shoulder to shoulder with men he once shunned. The gun battle stretched on, though it likely lasted less than an hour. Gradually, the tide turned. Flint's men, expecting a broken town, met defiance at every corner. When Judd Crow burst from the saloon, swinging an old Confederate saber, and dropped 2 attackers, even the outlaws seemed to grasp this wasn't the same Dustwood they'd tried to burn before. Clay paused only long enough to reload. Through the drifting smoke, he spotted Wade Flint himself barking orders from behind an overturned wagon. The outlaw chief was smart, staying just outside easy rifle range, but Clay already had a plan. "Belle," he called. "Put fire on that wagon, keep their heads down." She understood at once. Her rifle spoke in a steady rhythm, forcing Flint's men to duck. Clay darted from cover, running wide. Bullets kicked up splinters at his heels, but Belle's sharp shooting pinned most of the enemy. He slid into the stable, then edged along the back of the buildings, circling toward Flint's command post. He was almost there when a figure stepped from a narrow alley, a burly lieutenant of Flint's crew, revolver drawn and eyes hard. They fired at the same instant. The outlaw's slug seared a line across Clay Maddox's ribs. Clay's bullet punched straight between the man's eyes. No time to think. Wade Flint's voice barked orders just ahead. Clay rounded the last corner and found the gang leader crouched behind an overturned wagon with 2 gunmen. One spotted him and swung his rifle, but Clay's Colt was already up. 2 quick shots, 2 men down. Flint spun surprisingly quick for such a broad-shouldered man, gun coming up only to hear the empty click of a spent chamber. His eyes flared. He dove for a fallen weapon, but Clay's boot caught him square in the face, knocking him flat. The outlaw king came up with a knife, slashing hard. Clay twisted aside the blade, ripping his coat, then brought his gun's butt down on Flint's wrist. The knife skittered away. "You're finished," Clay said, revolver leveled at Flint's chest. Flint laughed through blood from his broken nose. "You think dropping me ends this? There'll always be another gang, another raid. Towns like this are sheep, we're the wolves." Maybe Clay said evenly, but not today. Flint's eyes flicked past him, body tensing. Clay was already pivoting when the shot cracked. One of Flint's wounded men had managed to lift his pistol. Clay fired even as pain exploded through his left shoulder. His bullet found its mark, but not before the outlaw's slug tore deep. Flint lunged for the fallen gun. A rifle barked from across the street. Belle Rowan's shot struck true, dropping the outlaw leader where he stood. Clay Bell ran toward him as his knees threatened to buckle. He braced against the wagon, keeping his Colt ready, though his left arm hung useless. Around them, the fight was ending, leaderless. The raiders broke and fled. Cheers rose as Dustwood's defenders fired after the retreating men, but Clay saw only Belle as she reached him. How bad, she asked, her hands quick and sure as they probed the wound. Shoulders busted. I think he gritted out. Pain came in heavy waves, but Flint's finished. So is his crew. She helped him sit and tore strips from her own shirt to bind the bleeding. "You damn fool charging in like that. Had to end it. Town couldn't stand another siege." Marshal Hank Rourke limped over, leaning on Luke Pike. Despite the blood on his sleeve, the old lawman managed a weary grin. "We did it. Counted 20 dead outlaws, the rest scattered to hell and gone." Dustwood stands. From doorways and barricades, the townsfolk emerged, clothes torn, faces blackened by smoke, but alive. Men who once crossed the street to avoid May Hollis's Chinese camp now clapped those same men on the back for their courage. Silas Boone's suit ruined, and gun still hot, laughed with Judd Crow as though they'd been lifelong friends. "Look at them," Belle murmured. "Nothing pulls folks together like a hard fight," Clay said. He tried to stand and nearly blacked out. Belle and Luke caught him. "Easy there, hero," Belle warned. Doc Levi Grant appeared with his black bag. "Let's get you inside before you bleed out." As they eased Clay into the church, now, a hospital dawn broke full over Dustwood. The town was scarred walls, pocked with bullet holes, beams charred. But it still stood, and its people stood with it. Doc Grant examined the wound with practiced calm. Bullet went clean through. Missed anything vital. Shoulder blades cracked, but not shattered. You'll heal, though that arm will be weak a while. "I've had worse," Clay said. "I'm sure you have," Doc replied, binding the bandage. "You thinking of staying in Dustwood? Looks to me like the town owes you a debt." Clay glanced at Belle, who had paused in her work to listen. "Haven't decided yet." "Well, we could use a man like you," Doc said, tying off the last knot, especially with Marshal Rourke talking retirement. Belle brought a cup of cool water. "Drink." He drank, grateful. She held his gaze. "You fought like a man defending his own home. My father would have been proud. I fought for my home, our home." Her voice was steady. "It could be yours too, if you want it." "Belle, I know. You're a drifter. You don't make promises." She sat beside him on the pew. "But maybe it's time to stop drifting. Time to stop running from ghosts and start building something new. Outside, they could hear neighbors already clearing rubble and quenching the last fires. But this time, the work sounded different, hopeful. "This town will need a new marshal," Belle continued. "Hank can't do it with that leg. Folks will offer the badge to you." "I'm no lawman," Clay said. "You're a protector. That's what counts." She took his good hand in both of hers. "Stay, Clay. Not just for Dustwood. Stay for what we could build together." He studied their joined hands, hers still dark with powder burns, and his blood. In her touch, he felt a life beyond endless roads, beyond grief. The ghosts of Ada and Rose Cross would always live in his heart, but maybe there was room for new love beside old sorrow. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll stay." Belle's smile was like sunrise after a bitter night. She leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss flavored with gunpowder and hope, with endings and new beginnings. When they finally drew apart, the church was flooded with morning light windows, cracked by bullets, but unbroken, just like Dustwood itself, and like two battered souls who had found in each other something worth standing and fighting for. That night, the moon rode low and silver over the quiet town, casting soft light through Belle Rowan's bedroom window. Belle Rowan stood before the mirror, the black veil folded in her hands, running her fingers over the delicate lace one final time. For 8 long months, it had been both shield and prison. Tomorrow, she would burn it. A soft knock made her heart skip. "It's me," came Clay Maddox's low voice. She opened the door to find him standing in the moonlit hall, his arm still bound in a sling from the battle 2 weeks earlier. In that silver glow, the hard planes of his scarred face softened carved lines, gentled by a rare peace. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, stepping aside so he could enter. "Wanted to check on you. Tomorrow's a big day. Tomorrow Dustwood would hold its celebration, honoring the fallen, saluting the living, and formally swearing in its new marshal." But Belle knew why he'd really come. Tomorrow she would walk down Main Street barefaced for the first time since Frank Deacon's death. "I'm ready," she said, setting the veil aside. "It's time." Clay stepped closer, his good hand lifting to her cheek. "You've been ready a while. Just had to believe it yourself." She leaned into his touch, marveling at how natural it felt. 2 weeks of stolen moments and careful courting under the watchful eyes of a changing town had built this trust grain by grain. "Stay," she whispered, "just for a while." They settled on the small settee by the window, Belle curling against his uninjured side. Outside, Dustwood slept in deep calm. Bullet holes were patched, burned beams replaced, and the old fear that had gripped the town was finally fading. "I never properly thanked you," Belle said softly, "for seeing me. The real me, not the widow, not the killer they whispered about." "There's nothing to thank," Clay replied. "I just saw a woman who'd been hurt and refused to break." His arm tightened around her. "Reminded me I don't have to stay broken either." She tilted her head up, a small smile touching her lips. "We make quite a pair, the gunslinger and the widow finding each other at the edge of the world." "Beginning of it, maybe," he said. The kiss that followed was slower, deeper, carrying promises beyond words. When they parted, Belle's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I love you," she said simply. "I never thought I'd speak those words again, but I do." "Belle." His voice was rough with feeling. "I need you to know I'm not an easy man to love. I carry too many ghosts, too much blood on my hands. And I carry my own," she reminded him. "Maybe that's why we understand each other. Maybe that's why this works." Silence settled like a soft quilt as they watched clouds drift across the moon. At last, Clay spoke again. "There's something I asked Judge Owen Frost to bring for tomorrow." Belle tensed. What is it? Marriage papers. He turned to face her fully. I know it's sudden. I know the town will talk. But when I almost lost you, I realized I don't want to spend another day running from the future, our future. He took her hand. I've spent 5 years running from the past. I won't run from this. She looked down at their joined hands, his scarred from years of gunfights, hers bearing the newer marks of Dustwood's defense. The town will accept it or not, she said. I don't care. All I care about is whether you'll have me, whether you're ready to stop hiding too. Belle thought of the veil on her dresser, of the months of silence and judgment, and of the woman she'd become fighting for her town, standing unashamed. That woman needed no one's permission. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I'll marry you. His kiss was fierce with joy and relief. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling like young lovers, instead of two souls weathered by grief. Though Belle added with playful sternness, we should wait until your shoulder heals. I'd hate for you to drop the ring. Woman, he said with a crooked grin, I've drawn and fired with worse wounds than this. My brave gunslinger, she teased, then grew serious. Clay, are you certain marriage means staying every day even when the ghosts grow loud? He was quiet a long moment. Ada Cross would have liked you. She was strong like you. For years I thought loving someone else would betray her memory. But I think she'd want me to live, not just survive. And Rose Cross. She'd have loved having you for a mother. You'd have taught her to be fearless. They held each other as the night deepened, sharing memories and hopes. At last, Clay rose to leave. Propriety still mattered even for Dustwood's soon-to-be marshal. Belle caught his hand. After tomorrow, no more hiding for either of us. No more hiding, he promised. We face the world together. Morning came bright and clear. Belle dressed with care, not in mourning black, but in a deep blue gown she had hidden away months before. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hair, leaving her face open to the day. A gentle knock startled Belle Rowan as she smoothed the deep blue dress she'd chosen for the celebration. It's Nora Pike, came the warm voice. Belle opened the door to find the shopkeeper's wife holding a spray of wildflowers. Thought you might want these for your hair, Nora said, stepping inside without hesitation. Belle started to protest, but Nora hushed her. You saved Luke's life in that fight, and my husband's too. The whole town owes you. With quick, sure fingers, she tucked blossoms into Belle's hair. Besides, it's time Dustwood had something to cheer for, besides just surviving. When Belle stepped outside, she found other women waiting the baker's wife, the seamstress, even May Hollis from the Chinese camp. They formed a quiet honor guard for her first veil-free walk through town. Main Street bustled with people hanging bunting and setting up tables. Work halted as Belle passed conversations dying mid-word. She kept her chin high, resisting the old urge to hide. Then a lone clap sounded Ruth Doyle, widow of brave Finn Doyle, whose life Belle had saved. One by one, others joined in until the whole street rang with applause. About time someone called. Never did understand all that hiding. Belle's eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. At the wooden platform built for the day, Clay Maddox waited in his best coat, a fresh marshal's star pinned to his chest. His gray eyes lit when he saw her. Beside him, Marshal Hank Rourke, on crutches but determined, addressed the crowd about courage and community, then fixed the badge on Clay with official words everyone knew had already been earned in gunfire and grit. Next, Judge Owen Frost stepped forward. I believe there's another joyful matter, he said. Clay reached for Belle's hand and drew her up beside him. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Belle Rowan has agreed to marry me, Clay announced, voice carrying clear. We'd like to do it now with all of you as witnesses. If anyone objects, speak now, or hold your peace." Silence held for a heartbeat. Then Judd Crow's big voice boomed from the back. "Only objection is you didn't do it sooner. Get on with it so we can celebrate right." Laughter swept through the square. Even Silas Boone, still mending from his wounds, tipped his hat in approval. The same town that had whispered poison about Belle for 8 months now stood ready to bless her happiness. The wedding was brief, as frontier weddings often were. Yet when Judge Frost pronounced them husband and wife, and Clay kissed her before everyone, Belle felt the very air change. The Black Widow of Dustwood was gone forever. In her place stood Belle Maddox, wife of the martial defender of the town, a woman unashamed. Music flared, tables filled with food, and neighbors' old rivals included mingled like one family. Children darted between benches, their laughter ringing like bells. Chinese musicians joined the town fiddler, weaving a wild, joyful harmony. "Look at them," Belle marveled. "2 weeks ago, this town was at each other's throats," Clay said. "Nothing like almost dying together to clear priorities." He pulled her close. Speaking of family, already thinking of little ones, Belle's smile teased. "Maybe when the town's settled, though heaven help any boy who comes courting a daughter of ours. Between the two of us, we'll handle it," he replied. She rose on tiptoe and whispered, "You're mine tonight, Marshal Maddox, and every night after. Promises, promises," he murmured, kissing her again. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in fire and rose, Dustwood pulsed with new life. Guns were cleaned and ready, but for this night, there was only joy, only hope, only the promise of tomorrow. 6 months later, Dustwood had transformed from a scarred outpost into a thriving settlement. The morning sun found Belle strolling Main Street with a basket of fresh bread for the church social. Her wedding ring caught the light as she greeted neighbors who now welcomed her with open smiles. Morning Mrs. Maddox, Nora Pike, called from the store porch. "Sheriff inside." "At the jail," Belle said with an easy smile, going over reports with Deputy Luke Pike. The boy who had once trembled in his father's doorway now wore a deputy's badge with quiet pride. All along the street, patched walls and fresh paint told the story of a town that had faced fire and bullets and chosen to live. Fresh construction now stood where flames had once raged, every timber and nail a badge of survival rather than shame. The Chinese merchants who had fought beside their neighbors were now part of Dustwood's heartbeat, their shops bright and busy along Main Street. Silas Boone's bank served everyone equally, a change that had brought unexpected prosperity. Belle Maddox found Clay Maddox at his desk, sunlight spilling through windows once shattered by gunfire and rebuilt stronger. He looked up as she entered, that slow, familiar smile still quickening her pulse after all these months. "Brought your lunch," she said, setting down a basket of fresh bread and preserved peaches. "Have I mentioned today that I love you?" "Only twice at breakfast," she teased, perching on his desk and eyeing the wanted posters tacked to the wall. "Any trouble brewing?" "Nothing we can't handle," Clay answered. "Couple of rustlers north of here, but the ranchers are working together now. Amazing what a common enemy does for cooperation." Through the window, they saw a wagon rolling in a family with all their belongings, children peeking out with wide, eager eyes. "Another new start," Belle said. "That's the 3rd family this month. Our town's growing. Might be time for a school." "Nora Pike and I have been talking about it," Belle added. "The old saloon would make a fine classroom." She took Clay's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Which is good, because we're going to need that school. Our child will need a place to learn." For a man who'd faced down death without blinking, Clay looked utterly stunned. You're sure Doc Levi Grant confirmed it yesterday? 7, maybe 8 months. Clay rose and gathered her carefully into his arms. Belle, his voice broke. I never thought I'd have this again, a family, a future. Neither did I, she whispered. But here we are. They stood together in the sheriff's office, where violence had once ruled, holding one another as life bustled outside. Children played in streets once haunted by fear. Merchants called out their wares, and hammers rang as new homes took shape. That evening they rode out to their favorite ridge overlooking the town. Clay's shoulder had healed, though it still ached when storms threatened. Belle rode beside him in a split skirt, her father's rifle in its scabbard, because the frontier still had teeth. They dismounted and looked down at their town built with courage and defended with blood. No regrets, Clay asked, as he always did. None, Belle replied, as she always would. The sunset painted the mountains in purple and gold, just as it had the day Clay first rode into Dustwood. But everything else had changed. The woman who once hid behind lace had found her strength. The drifter who'd run from ghosts had found a home. I was thinking, Belle said, leaning against him. Sarah and Emily, those are beautiful names. Clay's arm tightened around her. You don't have to. I want to, she said. They're part of you, which makes them part of us, part of our story. He kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair. Have I told you I love you today? Only 3 times, she teased. Not nearly enough. As dusk fell, they turned toward home. Wolves howled in the distance, but the sound now felt like a song of wild freedom rather than threat. Below them, Dustwood's lights shone warm and steady, promising hearth and belonging. They rode down together, marshal and wife partners, in every sense, 2 souls who had once believed themselves too broken to heal. Now they built something beautiful from ashes. Stars glittered overhead like scattered promises. Ahead lay their town, their people, their future. The West was still rough and unpredictable, but it remained a place where courage outweighed old mistakes and where love could bloom in the harshest soil. Belle Rowan had once hidden behind a veil. Clay Maddox had wandered like smoke, chased by memories. Now they rode side by side, faces open to the world, hearts open to tomorrow. The gunslinger had traded drifting for duty. The widow had burned her veil and defended justice. Together they helped Dustwood transform from a place of judgment into one of redemption. That transformation of selves, of community, of hope, was their greatest victory, the deepest veil lifted. The Wild West had tested them with fire and lead, with loss and prejudice, but they emerged not merely alive, but fully living proof that even in the harshest land, love can root and bloom. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.